than $4 million in compensatory damages. Now, that's far from the $150 million that they were seeking. A separate trial for punitive damages is now expected to follow, and there could be higher damages awarded there. As you'll recall, Alex Jones basically said in the aftermath of the Sandy Hook shooting that the incident was staged. He faced multiple lawsuits after that and later acknowledged that the shooting did happen. And in court this week, he testified that he now believed it to be 100% real. During the court this week, he failed to comply with the judge's orders. The judge was clearly frustrated with him for some of his answers and implied without the jury present that he had lied several times to the jury. This comes after this judge ruled last October that Jones was legally responsible for inflicting emotional distress on Heslin and Lewis, and they, of course, are the parents of Jesse Lewis, who was one of the children killed at Sandy Hook. So again, it's a $4 million award, far from the $150 million that was asked for by Heslin and Lewis after what you might describe as a very contentious trial. This is Janet Shamlian in Texas.
Janet, stay with us if you don't mind. Janet Shamlian is with us. She's on the ground in Texas following the verdict in the Alex Jones case, the civil suit in Austin, Texas this afternoon. Janet, looking ahead, what are some other challenges facing Alex Jones?
That's a good question because last week, Jones put his parent company that runs Infowars, his media show, into bankruptcy. And, of course, there's the belief that he did so to avoid, paying a large monetary award. And, in fact, during the testimony, he said to the jury that he was bankrupt, which the judge admonished him for, saying, that's not really true. You put your company into bankruptcy. But there will be the discussion of whether whether his company can pay these damages. And when asked during the trial what he would award or what he could pay, Alex Jones answered to the jury, he said an award of $2 million or whatever you feel is appropriate. As I mentioned, this is just for, this is not the punitive part of the trial. I mean, there will be another trial coming. It's expected to be much shorter, and at that point, a jury will deliberate punitive damages.
Janet Shamlian's on the ground for CBS News in Texas. Janet, appreciate you being here. Stay with us because this case has another element to it. The House Select Committee investigating the January 6th Capitol attack is now asking for Alex Jones's phone records. Take us inside this development in the civil suit and the trial.
So here's what happened. During the trial, prosecutors asked Alex Jones, did you ever text about Sandy Hook? And he replied no. And then later in the trial, those prosecutors came back and told Jones in front of the jury, look, I know you lied, and here's how I know. It was sort of a very startling moment. He said, your defense team in error actually sent me something like 2 years of your text messages by mistake. They were not supposed to, but I have 2 years of your text messages, Alex Jones. So I know you testified about, I know you texted about Sandy Hook, and therefore I know that you lied. And when this information became public in court within the last couple of days, then we heard that the January 6th committee would potentially like to subpoena those text messages.
Janet Shamlian for CBS News. Janet, can you just remind us, for those who are just tuning in to CBS News Streaming, about the verdict in the Alex Jones case today in Austin, Texas?
Yes. So the right-wing talk show host Alex Jones is going to have to pay the parents of a Sandy Hook shooting victim about $4 million in damages. That is according to a jury decision this afternoon. It comes at the end of a dramatic case that showcased the harm that comes by viral conspiracy theories. It's not what the plaintiffs, Scarlett Lewis and Neil Heslin, asked for. They were asking for $150 million in compensatory damages. And again, a punitive damages trial will follow. But this process started several years ago. I believe it was in 2018. Heslin and Lewis, who are the parents of Sandy Hook victim Jesse Lewis, they sued Jones's company, which is called Free Speech Systems. That is the parent of the right-wing media organization Infowars. And Jones has said in the aftermath of the shooting, 20 children, I believe, and 6 teachers were killed. The incident was staged. They are not the only county suing. There are other lawsuits pending. But this was the first award, and many looked at this as bigger than what happened in the aftermath of Sandy Hook, that it was more, it spoke more broadly to conspiracy theories and the harm they have on those impacted and the public.
Janet, how disappointing is it for these families? They sought $150 million from Alex Jones, $4 million in the verdict today. Is the $4 million seen as at least something by your sources familiar with this trial, or is it seen as a disappointment?
I don't know really how they come up with the number. It seemed large at the outset by a lot of people, and just not sure how to read into it. Again, these were the damages that, that they actually incurred. So it seems like $150 million is a big number, and perhaps a bigger number will come for punitive damages. They were asked about things like how much did have your counselors cost, your therapist over the years. So not really sure what the family will make of this. We have not heard from them yet at this time.
And Alex Jones, Janet, was deplatformed by a number of media companies for calling the Sandy Hook massacre a false flag operation. But he's continued to operate his show, hasn't he?
And he's making a lot of money doing it. And in fact, he did not show up for the testimony of Neil Heslin, the father of Jesse. I believe it was Tuesday morning, because he was doing his radio show. And when he showed up in the afternoon for the testimony of Jesse's mother, prosecutors presented his show from that day, which even as the trial against him was going on, he was making insulting statements about the father, Neil Heslin, calling him slow.
Janet Shamlian, really appreciate your time and for your reporting on this important story and this development. We'll leave you there for now. Let's bring in Jessica Levinson. She is on the phone, I believe, with us, joining CBS News Streaming. Jessica?
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. You are a CBS News legal contributor. What's your reaction to the $4 million being awarded to the families after they sought $150 million from Alex Jones?
Well, two things, basically. This has to be a disappointment for the families. Obviously, they were asking for a huge amount more. And I think it can't be a huge surprise, though, given some of the questions that we heard from the jury, given that this is really about actual damages. And as you were just discussing, and as I think it's important to remember, the punitive damages part of the trial will resume and is separate. So this is about a different level of damages. This is basically how much did it cost these parents as a result of the torts. And this trial was all about damages. There was already a default judgment that was imposed against Alex Jones. This was not about liability. The next phase is really the phase to watch when it comes to punitive damages. Typically speaking, punitive damages have to be only a kind of reasonable multiple of the actual damages, seen as basically a cap of 10 times as much of the actual damages. So I think at the most, my guess is we're looking at $40 million in punitive. Again, I think that's the most we would be looking at.
What's your expectation as a legal analyst?
So if you look at Alex Jones and if you look at the trial and the fact that we had this really shocking Perry Mason moment where he admitted on the stand that he had lied under oath, that in fact he did not provide text messages where he had texted about Sandy Hook and said earlier in this trial that he had no such text messages. Things like that cannot endear him to the jury. Having said that, if we look at the actual damages here, this doesn't, to me, look like a jury that is enraged by his behavior. And it's certainly, because it's such a far cry from what they were asking, I do think we need to be tempered. I would be surprised if we see the maximum amount of punitives, which is $40 million. Again, even though he is frankly such an unlikable figure, let's remember what this is all about. This is about him lying, claiming that the mass murder of children was a hoax and that the grieving parents were paid actors.
Jessica Levinson, a CBS News legal analyst, is with us. Jessica, stay with us. CBS News, Jessica, is being told that this is actually potentially a, quote, partial verdict award. What is your response to that piece of reporting?
So if this is a partial verdict award and not just for all of the actual damages, then frankly, that might be less of a surprise. So I looked down the counts, and it looked like, to me, based on a very quick scan, that this was a full award. But if there's some counts where they either misreported or they hadn't reported the full amount yet, then that obviously changes, again, the actual damages, how much the parents here were harmed, how much out of pocket they had to pay as a result of the defamation and the intentional infliction of emotional distress. But as we've been talking about, similarly, it would change the punitive damages because we're looking at a maximum amount of about 10 times the actual.
And when you step back, Jessica, and you look at the challenge of suing a media personality like Alex Jones, what were the challenges early on in this trial when they tried to take him on, the families from Sandy Hook?
That's such a good question. And I think part of the strangeness of this trial, for lack of a better word, is that this was not about liability. So there have been 4 defamation cases, as I know, against Alex Jones that have all ended in default judgments. What do we mean by that? What we mean is that he was sued for defamation, again, based on these false claims that Sandy Hook was a hoax, that the parents were paid actors. And in all 4 of those cases, he did not respond to court orders to provide testimony or to provide documents. So what the court did is they entered, as we said, a default judgment against him. So there weren't full trials where we had to hear his defense that, in fact, what we understand his defense would have been, that he was protected by the First Amendment in his claims. Now, that obviously changes the trial. So this was all about how much were the parents harmed, not whether or not the torts were committed. And I think that really changes the calculus for how this case proceeded. They didn't have to prove liability. It went straight to the damages phase.
Jessica Levinson, CBS News legal analyst, joins us now. Jessica, stay with us for a moment. You just mentioned that dramatic moment in court when the prosecutor told Alex Jones he had seen 2 years of his phone records and emails. What kind of predicament was that for Jones and his attorney?
So it's a predicament, I think, on a number of different levels. One, in the actual courtroom, he's caught in a lie. And I know that a lot of people are used to seeing trials play out maybe in a fictionalized version on television, but that simply does not happen very often in real life. That really was a Perry Mason, as we said, type moment. The other thing is we already know that Alex Jones, I believe, has been asked, his attorney has been asked by the January 6th committee, and I think either has already been asked or will be asked by the Department of Justice to turn over some of these text messages based on his involvement with January 6th. So this has repercussions and a ripple effect outside of this particular trial. We also need to remember that separately, when Alex Jones said, I didn't text about Sandy Hook, he was under oath. And now we have texts that show he did text about Sandy Hook. So there's a perjury issue here as well. And that's why the plaintiff's attorney said to him, as this really startling questioning was occurring yesterday. Do you know what perjury is? And so I think that, again, this is a multi-pronged kind of hurt for Alex Jones. It's not just this case. It stretches beyond this case.
We'll leave it there. Jessica Levinson from Loyola University and a CBS News legal analyst, thank you so much for being here. I'll be back in just a few minutes here on CBS News Streaming for Red and Blue.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding